My son-in-law mocked the old pickup I've kept for decades. He said it was junk and offered to haul it away. I smiled and signed one tiny slip under the hood. The title made him choke. If you're reading this, do me a favor. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. Maybe you're on a bus with the city humming outside. Maybe you're on your couch with the dog asleep on your leg. Wherever you are, I want you with me for a few minutes, right here in my driveway, on a Sunday that smelled like warm tar and cut grass, the maple leaves whispering overhead. I want you to stand next to me and look at the old pickup that has lived longer than some marriages and seen more miles than some men dare to imagine. I want you to hear the footsteps of a man who thinks he knows everything walking toward me with a bright grin and an empty heart, calling my life's memory junk. He didn't even say hello. He walked in like he was stepping onto a stage, one hand in his pocket, the other swiping away a stray leaf from his slick shoes, and he laughed when he saw the truck. "Still got that thing?" he said, pitching his voice like he was joking, but jokes don't slice like that unless there's a little cruelty behind them. "I can do you a favor, Dad," he added, and I felt that word stick like a dry cracker going down, because I am not his dad, not in the way that word deserves. "I've got a guy. He'll haul it away. Costs you nothing. Might even pay you $50 for the scrap." He gave me a smirk that felt oily. He gave the fender a tap with his knuckles and winced like it might stain him. "Junk," he said, announcing it to the air, to the neighborhood, to the birds. Little embarrassing to have this thing out front. I kept my face blank because I have learned that sometimes the most powerful thing in the room is silence. I rubbed the scar along the back of my thumb where the metal once bit me in winter. "Is that so?" I said, slow and flat, like I was saving breath for later. He thought he had scored a point. He thought I was preparing to explain myself, to defend a truck he decided had no place in this century. He didn't know the smell of gasoline and rain-soaked dust the truck still carried, or the way the bench seat had a groove right where my late wife's knee used to rest against mine. He didn't know that the coffee stains on the rubber mat were from mornings when our girl was a toddler, and we didn't have time to sit and sip. So we gulped and ran and laughed and spilled and lived. He didn't know any of it. He only saw rust, and the world has taught men like him to admire shine. I looked past him to my daughter, who stood a little to the side, her arms folded, watching. She wasn't the girl I had carried on my shoulders at the county fair anymore. She had a line between her eyebrows that looked like worry. She glanced at him, then at me, and said nothing. That silence spoke louder than either of us. "Do not judge her too harshly as you sit in your seat wherever you are. People learn silence when they've been told that peace means swallowing what hurts." She would tell me later that she didn't want to fight in front of the neighbors, that she wanted me to be happy, that the truck made the house look dated, a word with teeth too. Right then, she pressed her lips together and pretended to examine the mailbox as though it held an answer, and that quiet gave him room to keep going. He stepped closer to the hood, made a show of peering underneath. "Engine's probably seized," he said. "Even if it runs, it's a safety hazard. No airbags, no backup camera. I mean, come on." He straightened up and gave me a look like a teacher waiting for a student to realize 2 + 2 is 4. "Time moves on. We evolve." He tossed his hands in the air. "This is dead weight, Dad. Let me clear it for you. I've got a tow truck on speed dial. They'll be here in an hour. We'll get rid of it, and I'll take you to the dealership. Pick you something modern. My treat, even." He flashed teeth like a commercial. The thing about anger is that it wants to be loud. It wants to explode. It wants to throw words like fists. But I have learned to keep it cold. Cold cuts cleaner. Cold remembers details. Cold hears the little shake in his voice when he says, "my treat." Hears the way his tongue presses the T a little too hard, like he needs it to sound generous. Cold notices he still says tow truck, not flatbed, because he doesn't know the difference. Cold remembers the nights I worked late at the warehouse and the way I fell asleep on that bench seat while my wife ran into the grocery store to grab milk, because our girl liked warm milk at bedtime. Cold remembers that when my wife's hands grew thin and trembly in the hospital years later, the only place she asked to go, when she could still ask, was for one more quiet ride out to the lake in the truck. Windows down, the smell of pine in the air. "You cannot throw that away. Not for $50. Not for a clean driveway." I gave him a small smile that didn't reach my eyes. "1 hour?" I asked. He nodded. "An hour's generous," he said. But I know you need closure. He spread his arms like a man who thinks he's merciful. I nodded and looked at the hood. The paint was sun-faded, the emblem dulled, but the line of it was still true, steady as a heartbeat. I remembered tightening bolts with my little girl beside me, her hands covered in grease, her laughter flying, my wife snapping a photo and saying, "Hold still," even as we danced around like fools. When I closed my eyes, I could see my wife in her blue sweater, the one with the loose thread near the wrist, leaning on the door and smiling at me like I was the only good idea she'd ever had. The memory laid a warm hand on my chest. When I opened my eyes, the world felt sharp again. He launched into a speech then, the kind certain men love to give when they smell weakness. He told me about values. He told me about modern features. He told me about image, about property values, about first impressions. He told me he'd grown up with nothing and he wasn't going back to that vibe. He told me, with a chuckle, that nostalgia is a poor man's perfume. He had read that somewhere. I could tell, and I could tell he wanted me to be impressed that he had. He called the truck a hobby, a toy, a phase I should have outgrown. He never once asked what the truck meant. He never once looked at my hands when he said those things. My hands that have held a steering wheel like a lifeline, a toolbox like a prayer. He never once noticed the way my shoulders squared when he said the word junk, how my breath went slow and even, like a man about to lift a heavy weight. "Go ahead," I said finally, soft. "Call your tow truck. Let me get one thing in order." He raised an eyebrow. "Paperwork?" he asked, and I nodded. "Paperwork." He laughed and shook his head, pulled his phone from his pocket, and wandered to the curb as he talked loudly to his guy about a pickup. Ancient, ugly, probably leaking something, his words like stones tossed over his shoulder. When he finished, he swaggered back with a grin, blowing air out of his nose like a bull who thinks he's broken the gate. "Hour on the dot," he said. "You're doing the right thing." He reached out to clap my shoulder. I stepped slightly so his hand hit air and kept walking toward the hood. "Funny thing about old trucks," I said, and it came out like a thought instead of a sentence. He cocked his head. My daughter pretended to check a text message. Her eyes were wet, and she didn't want us to see. "They keep more than engines under here," I added. I popped the hood. The hinge squeaked the same way it had squeaked for 20 years, a high, thin sound I could have picked out in a crowd of 1,000 noises. The engine sat there like a quiet animal. Whoever thinks old things are dead has never watched them breathe. I reached my hand to the back corner where dust settles and where, if you were hauling scrap, you'd never bother to look. My fingers found the little clip I had mounted decades ago on a day I told no one about. A day I had given myself a private grin and said, "Well then." My hand closed on a tiny sleeve of plastic, thin, unremarkable. I slid it loose and brought out the paper inside. "What's that?" he asked. His voice sounded casual, but the words leaned toward me like they were trying to see around my body. "A shopping list?" he joked. "Maintenance logs? Oh, please don't tell me you're one of those guys." I didn't answer. I unfolded the paper. It was browned with time at the edges, but the ink, the important parts, held steady. My name stared back at me, younger, rounder letters. A number that would make a man swallow hard. A signature, a seal, a title, original and clear. Under it, clipped beneath, the appraisal, recent, official, stamped, with a figure that would make these neighbors stop pretending not to look and start whispering for real. I laid the slip on the edge of the fender, smoothed it with my palm like it was a child's hair. I looked at him and spoke in that same flat voice I keep for moments when the floor is about to shift. "This truck is not junk," I said. "It's a classic. Collector's grade. Less than 300 in this configuration left in the country. Numbers matching, unmolested frame." "Appraised it," I told him the figure. He blinked. His mouth opened a few degrees and then closed, like a fish tasting air. "My guy must be wrong," he said, but it sounded like he was asking me, not telling me. "It isn't your guy," I said. "It's mine. And he isn't wrong." I reached for a pen. Old habit, I keep one behind my ear when I'm working, and clicked it. The sound, tiny and clean, marked the start of the part of the story you came for. I touched the pen to paper and signed my name on the little line. The same first and last I had signed years ago when we brought our girl home from the hospital and the nurse said, "You're officially parents now." A name can make a thing real. A signature can make it unmistakable. His face did a thing then I wish I could draw for you. It cracked. He smiled to cover it. The smile fled. He started to speak and stopped, as though the words had to pass through a narrow door. You're selling it?" he asked finally. He looked around like a man who has lost his car in a flat, empty parking lot. You'll get good money." He tried to nod as if he had always loved the truck, as if this was the plan he had been rooting for all along, as if generosity came easy to him. I shook my head once. "I'm not selling it," I said. "I said I was putting one thing in order." I slid the title back into its sleeve and set it on the cowl for just a moment. I looked over at my granddaughter, who had just stepped out of the house with a book tucked under her arm and bare feet slapping the steps. The soft thump-thump sound, like my heart remembering something sweet. She is 10 and still knows wonder when she sees it. She still asks how things work and waits for the real answer. "Come here, baby," I called to her. She came, hair a little wild, eyes curious, a smear of green from a marker on one finger. "You know what this is?" I asked, tapping the paper. She shook her head. "It's a promise," I said. "It says who belongs to what." I looked at her parents, then back at her. One day, when you can reach the pedals and you know what words like work and respect and family feel like in your bones, this truck will belong to you. My son-in-law made a sound, half protest, half cough. My daughter's eyes went wide. I kept my voice even. "It won't be yours because you asked loudest. It won't be yours because you sneered the least. It will be yours because you'll love it right." "You can't be serious," he said, and his voice finally had the crack in it that told the truth. "You can't give her a dangerous relic." "She's a kid." He folded his arms. He tried to gather himself into importance. "Be reasonable." "I am reasonable," I said. "I've been reasonable for years. Reasonable when you rolled your eyes at our holidays because I made pancakes instead of ordering brunch. Reasonable when you corrected the way I pronounce quinoa as if food is a ladder you climb to reach a better person. Reasonable when you said the pictures of her mother made the house look old." My own voice almost tripped there, but I kept it level. "This truck isn't a toy. It's a piece of our story. And here's another reasonable thing. People who call things junk don't get them." He started pacing, fiddling with his phone, opening and closing apps like doors he couldn't walk through. "We'll talk about this later," he said to my daughter, as if I wasn't there. "We'll talk about wills, legal stuff, adult stuff." He glanced at me and tried to laugh. "I mean, what if he forgets what he signed?" "No offense. Memory goes." He tilted his head, pity painted on. "We'll get our ducks in a row." He thought law was a weapon he could grab off the shelf and point at me. He forgot that I worked 38 years making sure paperwork didn't get lost, that I filed and sorted and stamped and delivered for men who would have starved if I'd been sloppy. He forgot that a quiet man is often a precise man. He forgot that when my wife's hair fell out in the hospital, I labeled each scarf so she could feel pretty without asking. He forgot who he was dealing with. "Let's do some ducks then," I said. I walked inside and came back with an envelope from the safe. If you're following closely, you knew the safe had to show up. Every story like this has a moment when the quiet man, who let everyone think he was large-hearted and small-armed, reveals he's been carrying a spear all along. I set the envelope on the hood beside the title and slid out a document in a transparent sleeve. "Updated last month," I said. "Witnessed by 2 neighbors, you know. Filed at the clerk's office. Copy with my attorney. We can all read it together." My daughter reached out like the paper was hotter than it looked. She scanned the lines. Her hand went to her mouth. Truth has a frequency you can hear through bone. She looked up at me, and something softer than surprise spread through her eyes, something like relief. Maybe it is a relief when someone older than you finally tells the room where the line is. In the will, I'd written plain words, because complicated words can be shields for people who don't want to look at what they mean. The truck stays with me as long as I breathe. Upon my death, it goes to my granddaughter if she is still the kind of person whose hands show the day's honest work and whose words come out kinder than they have to be. If not, the truck goes to a scholarship fund in my wife's name that pays for young mechanics to learn the craft. I put that part in because love doesn't always land where you throw it. Sometimes it finds a new home and grows there just fine. Either way, the truck was never going to be his. He swallowed hard, like he had swallowed a word that stuck in his throat. "You're serious," he said, as if the evidence in front of him were not evidence. He looked at the number on the appraisal again, and I could see the math happening behind his eyes. The vacations and gadgets and opinions he thought he could buy falling away like leaves off a tree when winter shows up early. He exhaled through his nose, the sound of a man realizing the world is not organized for his convenience. "Fine," he said. "Have your truck." I was trying to help. I nodded once. "I know you think you were," I said. "But help that mocks first and listens later isn't help. It's vanity with a ribbon." He flinched. He'd have preferred a shout. Shouting he can fight. Flat truth sits in a room and makes people look at their shoes. The tow truck rumbled down the street right on time. The driver stepped out, a young guy with forearms thick from real labor and a ring mark on his finger where he probably took it off to avoid scratching it. He looked at the truck and his eyes went soft with respect. "You sure about this?" he asked, reading the order on his tablet. "Scrap?" He said the last word like it tasted bad. I smiled at him and shook my head. "Order's cancelled," I said. The driver nodded like a man pleased the world had chosen sense for once, tipped his cap, and left us in the quiet. My son-in-law, cornered and flushed, tried one more route. "It's not about money," he said, and as soon as he said it, we all knew it was about money. "It's about safety, image, the neighborhood." People talk. I looked around. 2 houses down, Mr. Alvarez stood by his hedge, pretending to water it with the hose that wasn't on. Across the street, Ms. Bell's curtains moved just enough. People talk. They always have. When I drove this truck home the first time, the year my hair was thick and black and my wife had a laugh like a bell, people talked then too. Some said I was foolish to buy new. Some said I was vain. Some said I was trying to be a man in a boy's county. None of them helped me change the oil. I stepped closer. Close enough to see the small shaving cut on his neck he had missed with the styptic pencil. Close enough to smell the aftershave meant to smell like cedar, but that smelled like a decision made for him by a man in a suit. "You stood in my driveway," I said, "and called a piece of my life junk. You did it with a grin. You did it in front of my daughter and the world, and you thought I'd roll over because you made it sound like help. I won't. Do you know why?" He tried to speak. I held up a hand and his mouth stopped like I had pulled a rope. "Because a family doesn't take what's yours and tell you you're not welcome. A family asks, learns, and cares. If you want to be family, you can start there. Sometimes a man needs to be told the rules he forgot he agreed to." He stood there and let my words settle. He looked at my daughter, and whether you like him or not, whether you think he is redeemable or not, you should know that he looked ashamed. That doesn't fix the day, but it makes the next one possible. He mumbled something about being sorry. It wasn't the kind of sorry that swims. It was the kind that gets its shoes wet at the edge. But it was a start. When they left, my granddaughter stayed. "Can we go for a drive?" she asked, not carelessly, but with a careful hope that made my chest tight. "Just to the corner and back." I hesitated, thinking of rules and belts and the what-ifs that creep in when you have lived long enough to know how fast good things can break. Then I saw my wife's blue sweater in my mind and heard her say, "Let her feel it." I nodded. We buckled in. The key turned, and the engine caught with the sound of a throat clearing to tell a story. We rolled down the street at a crawl, the wind touching our faces like a blessing. "Why do you love it?" she asked over the soft roar. Simple question. The kind that makes you look at your own bones. "Because it's honest," I said. "Because it doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. Because when it breaks, it tells you where it hurts. Because I met your grandmother on a day that smelled like motor. Oil and cinnamon buns, and if I close my eyes, I can still hear her humming in the passenger seat." I glanced over and saw her eyes wide. Like the truck was a spaceship and time was a field we could cross if we wanted. Because some things are built to last if you're willing to care for them. We parked where we started and sat in the quiet, the engine ticking its soft cooling ticks. She traced the seam in the seat with one finger. "I'll learn," she said. "I'll learn how it works. I'll learn the names of the parts. I'll wash it and not call it junk." She said the last word with a little curl of disgust, and I hid my smile in my hand like a bad card I didn't want the table to see. "We'll learn together," I said. "And when you're old enough and ready, We'll take the long road to the lake, like your grandmother and I used to, and we'll listen to the water talk. That night, the house felt different. Like a window had been opened that no one noticed was painted shut. My daughter texted me from upstairs. "I'm sorry." I texted back, "Me too." Both were true. She came down later with damp eyes and sat beside me on the couch. We didn't talk a lot. We looked at the photo on the mantel of the three of us. Me with more hair, her mother with more health, a baby grinning like a sunrise. And we let the picture do the speaking. She said she remembered the truck bringing her home from her first school play when she was a mouse with cardboard ears. I said I remembered too, the way she fell asleep against the door and drooled a little, and how her mother laughed and dabbed her chin with a napkin. We both laughed. We both cried a little. We both let the day soften. As for my son-in-law, he kept his distance for a while. Then he started small, carrying the groceries without sighing, showing up early for dinner and asking if he could help with the salad without rolling his eyes at my knife skills. Once he asked me, careful and earnest, "Could you show me the difference between a tow and a flatbed?" And I could tell the question wasn't about trucks. It was about learning the names of things so you can stop calling them junk. I said yes. We walked to the driveway, and I showed him the hitch, the winch, the places your hands can get pinched if you aren't careful. He nodded slowly, like a man translating a language he wishes he had learned sooner. Later he told me he had thought money could fix everything. I told him money fixes very little. "What fixes?" he asked. "Time," I said. Attention, care. He didn't laugh. Weeks turned to months. The maple leaves went red, then gold, then dropped and made a pool the truck wore like a shawl. I took the truck out most weekends, not far, just long enough to keep the fluids moving and the memories from turning brittle. Sometimes my granddaughter came along and asked me to teach her the names again, and I did, patient as a man planting seeds he knows he won't see grow tall but plants anyway. Sometimes my daughter came and put her hand on the dashboard and closed her eyes, and I could tell she was listening for her mother's hum. On what would have been my wife's birthday, we drove to the lake. We parked in the spot where the pines lean over like old friends, and the water sneaks up to your feet if you stand too close. I brought a thermos of coffee and 2 cups. My granddaughter brought a flower she had drawn, crayons pressed hard enough to wax the paper into shine. We sat on the tailgate and poured coffee and clinked cups like a toast in a quiet chapel. "To her," I said. "To her," they said. The wind moved through the needles and made a sound like a secret. Somewhere a fish jumped and fell back and wrote a circle on the water that widened and widened, thin as silk, until the whole lake wore it. You are still with me. I hope, wherever you are, bus, couch, kitchen table with the late light washing the plates gold. You watched a man call history junk. You watched another man hold his temper and show a paper instead of a fist. You watched a family wobble and not fall. You watched a truck keep breathing when everyone thought it was a museum piece. You watched a little girl learn the names of things. Maybe you saw yourself wanting to throw something away because it made you feel old and then keeping it because it taught you how to be new. Before I end, let me tell you the last small detail, because small details are where truths hide. The title, the slip I signed on the fender that day, has a faint smear near the bottom where my pen paused. I didn't notice it at first. Later, when I slid the paper back out to file it neat, I saw the smear and remembered the exact second it happened. It was when I looked up and saw my son-in-law's face lose its color, not with anger, not with envy, but with the sudden recognition that words have weight, and sometimes they land on your own foot. I had paused because I felt sorry for him, not sorry enough to change the plan, just enough to hope he could learn. That smear is my mercy, and it sits there next to my name like a reminder that even justice can be kind if it's careful. So what did we learn? You and I together. In this long, slow ride. That families don't take what's yours and tell you you're not welcome. That love is built like engines, piece by piece, torque by torque, by hands that pay attention and show up on cold mornings. That history can look like rust until the light hits it right, and then you see the chrome underneath. That quiet is not weakness, it is aim. That some things, like an old pickup and a promise made under a humming maple, are built to last if you keep faith with them. And that calling a thing junk says more about your eyesight than about the thing. If this story found you at the right time, If it made you feel something you needed to feel, do this old man a kindness. Tap like. Share it with someone who calls their own memories junk. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you're holding on to. And don't forget to subscribe so we can take another drive together soon.